New York Times columnist David French on the 2024 race and why he thinks gun voters shouldn't go for Trump. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America. This week, we are discussing the election once more. Things have changed quite a bit over the last 2-3 weeks here, and I think it's be prudent for us to dive back into this now that Kamala Harris has selected her vice presidential pick, which is the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. And to have this discussion, I've invited New York Times columnist David French back onto the show with us. Welcome to the show, David. Thank you for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stephen. And when you asked me before, like how to introduce me, and I just said New York Times columnist, it'd probably be also good to say New York Times columnist and gun owner.
Yes.
So I'm somebody who
and veteran
owns guns,
and
has in a legal career defended
lawyer.
gun rights, argued for gun rights. So I should have for a program focused on guns and gun rights. That's an important additional element.
Yes. Well, hopefully people have listened to past episodes you've been on and have some understanding of you. But why don't you get beyond that stuff? Why don't you give them a little bit more? You also podcast host at the Dispatch, right?
Yes. So I host a podcast called Advisory Opinions, which in all modesty, Stephen, is the world's greatest legal podcast, maybe the greatest legal podcast in the universe,
at least.
But
you have to be second to this one.
Oh, well, but yours is not strictly a legal podcast.
True. That's true. Good point.
So, but it's all because of my co-host, Sarah. Sarah is the main host of the show. She's incredible. But yeah, if you're interested in law and if you're interested in constitutional law, including gun law, that's a great podcast to check out.
And by the way, the Dispatch is sponsoring this episode. So we'll hear a little bit more about the Dispatch at the end of the show.
The crossing of the streams.
Yes. And I'd like to have Sarah on at some point as well.
Yeah.
She's seems very knowledgeable on the subject and would give us maybe a different viewpoint from yours as well. That's what makes your podcast worth listening to. But yeah, let's get into the Harris stuff. I think first we maybe put on your political analyst hat, and then maybe the back half of the show you can put on your advocate hat or your
sure.
Give us some explanations on what you're arguing for, people who care about gun rights should do in this election. So, but first, let's start with where the campaigns are at today. We had Harris come out and announce her VP pick. He is somebody who, Walz is an interesting character in the sense that I think he mirrors a lot of where the Democratic Party has gone over the last decade or so. In his sort of transformation on guns, right? He was a fairly pro-gun congressman. He had an A rating from the NRA. They endorsed him several times. And then he decided to run for governor in Minnesota in 2018, which was when the Parkland shooting happened. And there was a resurgence within the Democratic Party of gun control advocacy that he rode for sure to the governorship, or was part of what got him there. But he essentially changed, all of his positions on that. He now supports really the same things that Harris does, which are universal background checks, red flag laws, and a assault weapons ban, a ban on sales. So this has been really the message sent here is that they're not moderating any further on guns. This is sort of a doubling down on this position. And it's one that they've highlighted quite a lot in the campaign. I think Harris has said it in every one of her speeches. She's highlighted those three policies. And it seems to be something that's going to be a continuing theme in their campaign. What do you make of that pick and where that campaign is at right now?
Yeah, I think the pick and Harris, they're just solidly in the mainstream of where the Democratic Party is on guns. I mean, this is when I say mainstream of the Democratic Party, that's not the same thing as saying the mainstream of America, but
Right.
mainstream of the Democratic Party, which is for the background checks, for red flag laws, for assault weapons bans, and very critically, large capacity magazine bans as well, which in my view, is a much more relevant form of gun control even than the assault weapons ban, because what actually makes an AR-15 more, deadly than a 30-06 deer rifle tends to be the size of the magazine, not obviously, as you know, the strength of the round coming from the gun. That the 30-06 is going to be more potent. A deer rifle like that is going to be more potent than a 223 AR-15. But so I would say they're squarely in the mainstream of the Democratic Party on this. And also I would say that it's not going to be that relevant to public policy unless there is an unforeseen landslide. So here's what I mean. Two things have happened at once that are making the federal government less relevant to the gun control debate. One is the continued existence of the filibuster. So you're going to have to get substantial number of Republican votes to pass any gun control legislation, period. You just have to, unless they do away with the filibuster. So that's one element. So unless the Democrats have 60 senators, and the map for them is not good in 2024, it's really not good on the Senate map. The smart money says the Republicans will take the Senate, actually. And in that circumstance, there's just no hope for gun control legislation. The other thing is,
at least
the way
not
the
on that level, right?
Not on that level. The other thing is the way the Supreme Court ruled in the Cargill case, which is the bump stock ban case. That case wasn't truly about bump stocks. It wasn't really a gun control case. It was an administrative law case, but it has gun control ramifications, because what the court basically said was, wait a minute, executive branch, you don't have the freedom to continually reinterpret statutes to create new regulations. So that case, if listeners remember, involves actually a Trump era gun control measure, which was the regulatory ban on bump stocks. That was not a statutory ban. Congress didn't act. It was a regulatory ban. And what the Supreme Court said was, no, you can't take a statute and interpret it in endlessly new ways to accomplish what you want. The statute's going to basically have one interpretation. And so Harris, even if she wins, is going to have very limited ability to rewrite federal regulations in a way that limits gun rights. And so in many ways, the political battle over gun rights is much more at the state level than it is at the federal level. Now, you notice I did not talk about one whole other area, which we need to talk about, and that's judges and what's happening with judges.
Yeah.
But that is very, very, very much more complicated than people realize. But yes, so as far as Harris and Walz go, they are very much mainstream Democrats who I don't think have any realistic prospect of enacting a federal legislative agenda.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. And I do want to talk more about that aspect, the sort of practical side of it, when we get to the second half of this discussion. But on the politics side of it, as how this is going to translate for the campaign, I'm interested in your thoughts, especially because one of the major criticisms that's been brought up of Walz since he was picked is, the history surrounding his time in the military, his service. And there have been a number of critiques, but it seems like the one that's perhaps the most legitimate is Walz having claimed a number of times that he carried the kinds of guns he wants to ban in war, and when he didn't actually deploy to any war zone during his time in the militia. I'm interested in your perspective on that. One, on the claim, obviously I think J.D. Vance has called this stolen valor. Yeah. You obviously, you can give people your background in the military here for some explanation, but you have a unique perspective on this. I'm interested in your thoughts on the claim, and then how that affects this politically.
Yeah, I mean, first, so I'm a veteran. I served in Operation Iraqi Freedom during the surge as an Army lawyer, a JAG officer for the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, 2nd Squadron in Diyala Province from November of 07 until late September of 08. So I deployed as an Army JAG officer. So I did detainee operations, rules of engagement, et cetera. But I was not outside the wire as much as our CAV scouts and our armor officers, but, I spent a lot of time outside the wire in Diyala Province.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, and it's interesting. So I think about this through the prism of being a veteran. And interestingly enough, Stephen, I just thought I want to get a kind of a gut check on where the friends I served with, what did they think about all of this? And so I jumped on our group text and I was like, where are y'all on the Walz thing and the stolen valor argument and everything? And it was interesting. They're not super political guys. They're super smart, super engaged in sort of in American public policy, but they're not like partisans one way or the other. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk to people who didn't have an obvious pre-existing bias on this. And interestingly enough, I was harder on Walz than they were. So here was my perspective. My perspective was he should not have said what he said about carrying a weapon of war in war. Like you shouldn't have said that, because for people who are just applying the normal language, English language, that when you say I carried a weapon in war, what they automatically fill in is in a war zone.
Yeah.
In a war zone. So
right.
I will tell people, for example, I carried a weapon in combat operations, which is absolutely true. Foot patrols, raids, vehicle patrols, all of these things, I carried a weapon, but I do not say I carried a weapon in combat, because I don't have a combat action badge. In other words, I wasn't blown up. I didn't receive direct fire. So in those circumstances, I try to be precise with my language. And so he was absolutely, if you squint and you strain and you say, well, I was serving overseas in a security capacity under legal authorities of Operation Enduring Freedom. So in other words, it is a wartime deployment. I'm carrying a weapon in a wartime deployment. Even if I'm not in the war zone, then I carried it in a war. Okay. That's a real stretch.
Would he have been carrying
if he was in a security capacity, right. Yeah. But
so, because he was deployed to Italy in support of operations in Operation Enduring Freedom. Right. Like he was deployed. He just wasn't in
he wasn't in the war zone. Right? Yeah. Right. And this is something, by the way, that happened all the time. So for example, when I went to Iraq, I volunteered to go to Iraq, but my unit, my reserve unit, because I was an Army reservist, was mobilized under Operation Iraqi Freedom, but it was this has been years, so my best memory of the actual legal enabling reason why they were mobilized, but 101st Airborne was mobilized or was deployed to Iraq. Fort Campbell then has a huge missing number of officers and soldiers to sort of help keep the base going while the 101st was gone. So my unit was mobilized to sort of backfill Fort Campbell. They were mobilized under Operation Iraqi Freedom, but they were not deployed to Iraq. So somebody can say I was mobilized under OIF, even if they didn't deploy, or I was deployed under OEF, even if they didn't go to Afghanistan. All that's hyper technical and more than a little confusing to people. And so you just need to speak plainly. You just don't embellish, and so. Yeah.
And it does feel like he was embellishing for effect here, because the whole point of these statements was that he carried that these are weapons of war, which I also going to discuss for a moment in a minute, and that he carried them in war. And that's why he thinks they should be banned. That's the argument. And it does seem like an embellishment or that it's misleading. But
I don't think he should. Yeah.
Not to the level of like, I served somewhere that I didn't serve.
Right.
There are levels to these things.
Right. He shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have said it. I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world, but he shouldn't have said it. I'm more interested in the weapons of war argument than I am in that.
What do you make of that? Because, obviously there's a distinction between, an M4 and an AR-15, primarily that an AR-15 is only capable of semi-automatic fire, where the military versions of these rifles are capable of fully automatic fire or burst fire, something.
Burst
along
fire,
those lines.
yeah. Like the M4 I carried had the 3-round burst function. Yeah.
And so I don't know, do you make much of that distinction? Do you think he's being misleading on that front too? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Again, this is one of those issues where there's a hyper-technical answer and a colloquial answer, and the colloquial answer is more accurate than the hyper-technical. So the hyper-technical answer for Tim Walz saying I served in war, hyper-technically true, but colloquially, the way we normally think of it, not true. Okay. When it comes to the contrast between a civilian AR-15, I own a civilian AR-15, and the M4 that I carried in Iraq is really truly, especially if you can buy some of the good civilian optics, that are available. Some of the optics you can buy as a civilian right now are better than the optics I had on the weapon when I deployed. But the reality is the main distinction is that 3-round burst function. So if you say an M4 is an AR-15, as a technical matter, that's just not correct. The M4 I had a 3-round burst function. If you say they're substantially the same as a weapon of war, you are correct, because I don't know many people who ever use the 3-round burst function for a very good reason. It's not terribly accurate. And so the vast majority of people who deploy and actually use their rifle in combat use it in the semi-automatic mode. Now, they do have the ability to switch to 3-round burst if they want, and sometimes that's used, for example, in covering fire, etc. But as a general matter, we really train for accuracy, and accuracy is superior in the semi-automatic mode than the fully automatic or the 3-round burst. And so as a practical matter, an AR-15 and an M4 are very, very, very similar, and the way they're used in semi-automatic mode is the dominant way. It's the exclusive way civilian, and it's by far the dominant way in the military context. So there is a parallel. And I think if people are trying to say, how dare you try to regulate this as a weapon of war when it's clearly not because it doesn't have 3-round burst, you're kind of ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the weapon of war is almost always used in the same semi-automatic capacity. There are semi-automatic mode that you exclusively use it as a civilian.
Yeah. Although to be clear, obviously an actual M4 or M16 with fully automatic capabilities is already heavily regulated in the United States, and new sales of them are banned as well.
Super regulated.
But going off of what you're saying there, the other issue with this argument that you see is, I mean, weapons of war is a total, it's kind of a meaningless term, isn't it? Because what else are you carrying when you're over deployed? Even today, you're carrying a semi-automatic handgun. Yeah. Right? Probably a Beretta in your case.
It's a Beretta 9mm, yeah.
But the 6-hour P320 is what they use as the Army sidearm today. The 1911 was obviously a sidearm for 80 years. And then even things like pump action shotguns, bolt action rifles, these are things that our military uses today and has used for generations.
Well, calling something a weapon of war, I mean, the Brown Bess musket, right, that was sort of a standard kind of musket in the 18th century, was both a weapon of hunting and a weapon of war. So the phrase weapon of war is a political phrase. Right. It is not a legally significant phrase.
Because almost every type of gun has been used, and I'm talking about like action. Every action of firearm out there has been deployed by armies in war at some point over the years, and oftentimes still is. Even the things that Tim Walz, the kinds of guns he likes, pump action shotguns, Remington 870, that is a common firearm used for breaching buildings and things of that nature. And in fact, the Germans in World War I thought that the use of pump action shotguns was a war crime, the old trench guns. So, that's the only other thing on that point I find a bit odd. But I do, speaking of Tim Walz's background as a gun owner, this is something that is part of his biography that they've played up a lot. He's won these like congressional shooting competitions. He He likes to hunt. They put out pictures of him with his semi-automatic Beretta shotgun on hunting trips. Obviously, as we went over, his positions on gun policy are not something that are something that earn him an NRA F grade now. But he does still have this Joe Biden-esque, approach to guns, and where he owns guns, he likes to hunt. He has that aspect of it, and there's sort of a vibes or a cultural appeal that he might generate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that if you're talking about the difference between, say, the gun rights community, which is distinct from the gun owning community, they're not the same thing, and then sort of the larger American general public, that where he is as a gun owner, but not for example, possessing assault weapons, or for universal background checks, or for red flag laws. As a general matter, he's going to be in the majority, the big American majority on those issues. So universal background checks poll well, red flag laws poll well. Even in Tennessee, where I live, red flag laws poll well. However, he's going to be well outside of the Republican base, way outside of the Republican base, which many folks in the Republican base don't want any additional limits on gun rights at all, and want some of the existing limits to be lifted. So that's a minority.
Same for most of the gun rights movement too.
Right. So that's a minority movement in the United States of America, but it has very strong power within the GOP. And so, the interesting thing about this is that if you're going to be running against Walz on guns, it's much more of a base mobilization strategy than it is a reach the middle strategy. Because the simple fact of the matter is some of these additional regulations are largely popular, although I will say the assault weapons bans kind of go up and down, right? If you have a survey right after mass shootings, often the support will be very low. If you have a lot of chaos in the country, such as the rioting in 2020, sometimes you'll see that support go up because people are now buying them for self-defense reasons in their home. And so that's more variable. That's more variable. But the reality is, one of the reasons why the gun rights community has been so powerful is basically this. One is there's just more people who are single issue gun rights voters than there are single issue gun control voters. So very much like pre-Dobbs, a lot of the intensity gap on abortion was that while Americans might have supported abortion rights more broadly, the people who really cared about the issue were often disproportionately pro-life. Now that's switched post-Dobbs, but it's a very similar dynamic on gun rights, that while the country may more broadly be sympathetic to various gun control initiatives, the core, the people who really, really care, tended to be more in the gun rights camp than the gun control camp. And so that's why they had sort of disproportionate political effect. It's a kind of a rule of politics that it's not just numbers, it's intensity. And intensity can overcome numbers because people who are intense will turn out, they'll vote. And people who might be more casually connected to an issue are not necessarily going to, come out when it's 17 degrees in Iowa and the snow is, up to their knees in November or whatever. And, or if they feel a little under the weather, they've got a cold, forget it, I'm not going to vote. But, I know people who would, if they were on a ventilator, would want some way for somebody to get them to the voting booth to vote to preserve gun rights. And there are people who, have that level of intensity. So the intensity gap has always been, or not always, but frequently been in the favor of the gun rights community. However, it's very interesting, the Republican retreat on gun rights. The question I have for that is, will that do anything to the intensity gap? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and that's sort of translations well, I think. First, do you think that's why the Harris campaign, as part of their broader walk back of a number of her positions, especially from the 2020 primary campaign, that they put out that she is no longer pushing for a mandatory buyback of AR-15s and similar firearms. Do you think that's part of the reason why that happened?
The Harris campaign right now is basically trying to memory hole 2019 and 2020 as best as it possibly can. And it's actually pretty astonishing to watch. And I think they've done, just from a political analyst's perspective, they've done it basically the only way you can do it, which is just rip the Band-Aid off. Just right now say,
just
no, I'm not for, I'm not for a fracking ban. I disagree with defund the police. I'm not for a buyback program. Like, you go through and there's issue after issue. And the funny thing about this is, Stephen, the Democrats, in many ways like the Republicans also, but in different respects, are still living with the consequences of kind of this way, and in the way in which a lot of people went a little bonkers in 2019, 2020. So, on the Democratic side, you had what's called the Great Awokening. And what was the Great Awokening? It was this giant move, mainly by white, educated progressives to the left, like way to the left. And what was interesting is it turned out they moved way to the left of most of the rest of the Democratic Party. And so a lot of white progressives were really pushing the Democratic Party further left than it wanted to go. Well, up you have this 2019, 2020 primary season. And a lot of Democrats like Kamala Harris, who had built their bios in a very conventional Democratic way, like I'm a cop, I'm a prosecutor, I'm an AG, all of a sudden walk into this race and everything that was an asset was a liability because of the Great Awokening. And so they're twisting and turning and dancing and changing positions, and they don't know what to do. And meanwhile, Joe Biden's out there and he's just like, I'm just the same guy I was. And he wins in a landslide, because in the Democratic primary in a landslide, because that Great Awokening was actually out of step with most Democrats. So here we are in 2024, and every professional Democrat alive on the planet knows this. So they know that they almost lost the 2020 presidential race because of the Great Awokening. They also know that they almost lost Congress in 2020 when they expected to make gains, big gains, because of the Great Awokening. So they're not going to rerun the Great Awokening. And so she is pulling the Band-Aid off on all of these sort of Great Awokening positions. And so now she's running sort of as the Democrat that she's been her whole career, which is definitely left of center, no question about it, but within the Democratic mainstream. And so I think that's why she's got a fighting chance now. And in 2019, 2020, her campaign absolutely crashed and burned.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of sort of a change in position or a change in approach, at least, you mentioned this a moment ago, but what we've seen from the Republican Party and from the Trump campaign over the last couple of weeks here has been a noticeable retreat from talking about gun policy at all. You had the gun policy promises stripped from the Republican Party platform when they used to have a whole section, a whole list of policies they were going to advocate for. You had no gun rights speaker at the RNC when the NRA had someone there in 2016, which was the last time they had an RNC. And then Trump didn't mention it once in his hour and a half long acceptance speech. And it sure seems like their strategy has become one of avoiding this topic altogether. And if anything, recently Trump's line about guns has been that gun owners don't vote. Sort of contrary
which is
to what
so weird to
earlier.
say. Yeah.
Now he did just this week bring up guns in his most recent press conference. It's not clear whether that's going to be whether they're shifting back towards trying to turn out base voters like you suggested earlier, or if that's just a fleeting thing in a stream of consciousness press conference that he's common to doing. But I'm interested in your thoughts on that. What do you think is going on with the Republican side of this?
Yeah. So what's going on with gun rights is the exact same thing that's going on with abortion and with Project 2025. It's the exact same analysis. So what you have is a situation where Trump, who lost the popular vote and won by the skin of his teeth in 2016, lost the popular vote by more in 2020, and then barely, and then lost, of course, the Electoral College in 2020, coming into 2024, his thinking was this: all of these people who are hardcore pro-life, hardcore gun rights, they're my absolute base. Like I don't have to do anything to win over the Heritage Foundation. I don't have to do anything to win over the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't have to do one thing. However, if I cater to them, I'm going to give ammunition to the Democrats, and I'm going to lose with the exact same population that I lost with before. Sort of the more suburban moderates who often voted Democrat in the past and now weren't going to vote. Often voted Republican in the past and now we're voting Democrat. And so he was doing a classic move to the middle that often occurs in these kinds of elections, but more emphatically than any Republican I can remember. So, if you look at the Republican platform on abortion, the Republican platform on abortion is the most pro-choice platform for Republicans since before 1980. It is not just distancing yourself from the pro-life movement, it is shoving it into the corner. This Project 2025, some of Project 2025 is way over the top. A lot of it is standard kind of Republican conservative stuff. And he's like, get the Project 2025 away from me. And gun rights, it's very similar. I think he's able to see, just as anybody else can, that a lot of these sort of generalized Democratic positions like assault weapons bans, red flag laws, background checks are pretty darn popular. And so he doesn't want to get on the wrong side of a 60-40 issue or a 65-35 issue. And so I think what ended up happening is he demonstrated that he's willing to throw part of his base under the bus, very confident they're not going to do one thing about it. In fact, in the pro-life world, they're still every bit as ferocious to pro-life people who don't want to support Trump as they used to be. So that calculation proved to be correct. He's got pro-life loyalty no matter what.
Yeah.
So
you saw
his
that on
calculation
the pro-gun side too, right? With,
his
Kyle Rittenhouse,
calculation,
who has become a pundit now for some reason. Same thing happened when he said he wasn't going to vote for Trump, and then immediately had to walk that back.
Got destroyed by MAGA online. And so he is making a calculation that if you are a gun rights voter, you're not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. If you're a pro-life voter, you're not going anywhere. And so, but it's interesting what a party is willing to abandon to win an election and what it's willing to not. So he's not willing to abandon his claim that 2020, the election was stolen in 2020, in spite of the fact that that's just an obvious lie. Right. He will never abandon that. But he will abandon a pro-choice position. That tells you something about priorities, right? If he will absolutely not abandon the idea that the election was stolen, but he will go very silent on gun rights, well, that tells you something about where his priorities really are. And so, but again, it doesn't matter to his base at all, not one bit. They don't care. They're going to go all in for him. And so he's taking them for a ride, and they're joining, and they're boarding the bus happily.
So let's get into that a little bit now. I think we've got a good block there on the analysis of what's going on. Let's get into, your thoughts on why maybe they shouldn't go along with it. You've been obviously a very vocal Trump critic since the very beginning, and has really affected your whole life and career path to this point. And you're sticking by that. You don't want to see him reelected. Does that mean you're going to vote for Harris? And two, how do you justify that to gun rights voters, people who care about the issue? Why, it seems to be something you care about. Maybe you're a little more moderate than some of the other gun rights activists out there, but you own AR-15s. You've been a gun owner for a long time, and I imagine you're probably a fairly rare breed at the New York Times on this topic.
I might own more guns than everybody else combined.
Probably, right? Although you never know. It's one of the things that working at big media organizations. A lot of there are regular people working there too, and there's plenty of gun owners
for sure,
in major media. But
I have an unusually large number of guns, but in part because my son was in shooting sports, and so he was a trap and skeet shooter. And as you know, Stephen, if you're going to be a trap and skeet shooter, you're going to end up with a lot of shotguns in the house. So anyway,
and shotgun
go
shells
ahead.
too. But
Yeah.
So what is your reasoning here as to why, looking at the policy difference, we just went over a bunch of them, right? There is a very stark policy contrast here. And, the politics of the campaign may be one thing, but the policy contrasts are obvious, especially when it comes to things like judges, right? We know that Trump has a track record he can at least point to on judges, and pro-gun people can look at what they've done and say, yes, he was on my side on this stuff. Whereas we know that Harris' campaign is not going to produce the same kind of judges. It will likely produce the exact opposite. And there's you just alluded to some of the constitutional concerns with Trump and what he tried to do after the last election. What he said, made all kinds of remarks that would about dictatorships or all sorts of things that you can point to and be concerned about what Trump's going to do. But you can also point to Harris and packing the court and ending the filibuster, really clawing back some of these judicial interpretations of the Second Amendment that have provided a lot of protection for gun owners over the last several years, and be concerned about that as well. So let's, I guess, just get into where you're at and why you view it that way as a gun owner.
Yeah. So I would put it like this: all other things being equal. In other words, if we're walking into a race and the only difference between Trump and Harris is the Republican vision of gun rights versus the Democratic vision, I would support the Republican. But guess what? All other things are not equal, not even close. So here you have a Democrat who I disagree with on gun rights. Not all the way. I mean, I support red flag laws. We've had a podcast about that, and that was a great discussion.
Which people should listen to, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. We had a great discussion about it. I support red flag laws. So I don't all the way disagree, but I disagree with many elements of Democratic gun control platforms. But all other things are not equal. So if you take, for example, that she has an idea about legislation that a number of additional things have to happen for that legislation to pass, including either a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, at the very least, a majority plus a vote to eliminate the filibuster, plus a majority in the House that the Democrats don't have. So all of their ideas about gun control are contingent on many, many, many other things. So if these other things all fell into place, you would see a change in American gun rights. The chances of all those other things falling into place are pretty remote. Now, let's look at another issue: Russian aggression in Ukraine. Okay, so I think that's a world historic issue. I think that's something that 100 years from now, historians are going to be talking about as a hinge point in this moment in our history that could have catastrophic, if we play this wrong, if we give in to Russian aggression, could have catastrophic effects on our nation, on our children, on our children's children. It could fundamentally change the balance of power in the world, bring us closer to a unthinkable World War III that would make World War II perhaps look. Could make World War II look less deadly. World War II could be less deadly than World War III, as horrifying and shocking as that could be. So you have a Ukraine issue here that is world historic, and you have a issue on an assault weapon ban that, might, if 3 other things happen, could possibly happen, but even if it does happen, is nowhere near an historic importance as abandoning an ally facing Russian aggression. So to me, I feel like what ends up happening is a lot of Americans sort of get in this mindset where they say, and I get it, I totally understand it, they take the issue that matters the most to them for reasons that could be super understandable, related to their own personal history and their biography and the things that they've experienced. And they say, this is the thing. Look, I get it. If your conscience tells you that's the most important thing, I understand, I get it. But I urge voters to sort of take a much more holistic approach, and also to sort of think about what can a president control and what can a president not control. And so a president has most control over foreign policy, and in many ways has least control over legislation. And so if you are worried about a president because of legislation, but you support them because of foreign policy, the foreign policy side of this is much more likely to become real than the legislation side, because legislation is a team sport. It requires a House, it requires a Senate, it requires the president to sign on unless there's a veto override, which would require 2 supermajorities. So legislation is a team sport. Foreign policy is often like golf or tennis. It's like one guy or one woman makes the call and the whole rest of the ship of the state falls into line. And so that's why, in many ways, when it comes to a presidential election, I am more concerned about foreign policy than I am about domestic policy, because in a very real way, the president has more power over foreign policy than they have over domestic policy. Doesn't mean I don't care. Doesn't mean I don't care about domestic policy passionately. I do. But I also know that it's a team sport. And you've got to, if any history has showed us anything over the last 15 years, it's that in a closely divided country, no president from either party is able to really fundamentally rework American law. It's been much more like they get kind of one big piece of legislation apiece. And that's been about it. And so I'm much more interested where the president has lots of control versus where the president has much less control.
That's interesting. So, I mean, is this then an argument for, I guess, what is your ideal outcome? I mean, obviously you don't want Donald Trump to win, right? That just to establish that. And that would very likely mean Kamala Harris does win and becomes president. But are you looking for like a divided government scenario? Are you comfortable with Democrats having total control of Congress and the presidency? Because it sounds to me, I do not want total control. Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, because what it sounds like to me is that you're arguing that the most likely outcome in a Harris win is divided government, because Republicans have a really good map for Senate control. They're likely to gain control of the Senate regardless of what happens with the presidency. And the opposite is not true. The other way, if Trump wins, he's probably going to have Republican control of the Senate and the House and would have more ability to do something. But I guess even beyond that, you seem skeptical that either one could implement a really sweeping legislative agenda if they were elected, and you're more concerned about like foreign policy and the powers of the president in that area.
Much more concerned about that, because look, for the president to sort of implement their agenda, they need really a united Congress. They need a operational control of Congress up to and including either a filibuster-proof majority or removal of the filibuster. And right now, removal of the filibuster, people have talked about it for years and years and years. But there's a critical mass of both Republicans and Democrats who do not want to do that, because they know what will happen. And it's interesting. They've learned lessons from the Harry Reid, Mitch McConnell gradual elimination of the judicial filibuster, and they don't like it. They don't like it. And so
to that point, what do you think of judges? Are you comfortable that the pro-gun majority that exists on the court now would survive a Harris administration?
I don't know which Republican would retire in a Harris administration. Like that, that's, as of right now, both Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, the 2 oldest justices, show no sign that they want to step down, certainly not under a Democratic administration. And then the other thing to realize, Stephen, and I'm glad we're getting into this, the pro-gun majority on the Supreme Court is not as pro-gun as people think. And we learned that very clearly in the Rahimi case, very clearly. And I have not seen enough conversation about this in the larger gun rights community, because I think one of the issues is this new legal test, text, history, and tradition, is so new to people, they don't really know how to interpret it. But let me put it this way. The way the Supreme Court articulated the text, history, and tradition test in the Rahimi case, this was the case that said that yes, Texas, or yes, the federal government can in fact prohibit people subject to a domestic violence restraining order, can prohibit them from having a weapon. So that was the holding of Rahimi. It was 8-1. The only holdout here was Clarence Thomas. Right. But what's even more interesting than 8-1 was what the conservative members of the justice majority, the 5 conservative members, how they explain their position. And if you look at it and you read it carefully, what they're saying is that their understanding of text, history, and tradition gives the state legislatures a pretty wide berth to regulate weapons and individuals that they believe to be extraordinarily dangerous. And so the practical result of Rahimi is literally, Stephen, I don't even know if an assault weapons ban would be struck down by this court after Rahimi. I really don't.
That's interesting.
Because if you look at the way they talked about history, they did not talk about history in the sense that Clarence Thomas wanted them, which was for a gun control restriction to be upheld, you need to find a historical analogy that's very, very, very close. So, for example, he was saying you can't do a domestic violence restraining order restriction on gun ownership because history shows there's another way of doing of limiting access to weapons by dangerous people, and those are called surety laws, where somebody like puts up a bond that they forfeit if they misuse the weapon. And so he was saying because there's that historical model, that's what you have to go with. Whereas the majority, the 5 justices, the 5 conservative justices plus the 3 more liberal, said something very different. They used it much more like, okay, I'm going to look at the historical record and see if colonial era or immediate post-ratification legislatures were concerned with dangerous people and things, and did they regulate dangerous people and things? And if the answer is yes, then that's creating a permission structure for us in the current moment to regulate dangerous people and dangerous things. And then there's this interesting part of the Heller decision that a lot of people haven't focused on. Mm-hmm. And this interesting part of the Heller decision explicitly says that, and this came up in the Fourth Circuit en banc ruling upholding Maryland's assault weapons ban, that the Heller decision explicitly distinguishes weapons that it calls M16s and the like. M16s and the like is the actual phrase that can be regulated, right? Well, what does and the like mean? Does it mean identical, just like M16? So an M4 with a 3-round burst and an M16 with a 3-round burst or a fully auto mode? Or does it mean substantially similar to? In which case, an AR-15 semi-automatic that is used exactly the way M16s and M4s are used downrange, does that mean substantially similar to? Nobody really knows. And so it's very up in the air, even looking at Scalia's precedent in Heller. So it is not the case that right now the federal judiciary is solidly and strictly opposed to gun control regulation. It is the case that they protect a right to have a weapon in the home for self-defense. They protect a right to bear a weapon outside the home from self-defense, subject to reasonable regulation. And then we don't know where they stand on assault weapons or large capacity magazines.
That is true. And that's something that we've talked about a lot on this show. So the intricacies of what the Supreme Court has actually said on these things, rather than some of the impressions that people have of where the court is at, maybe based on concurrences by Alito or Thomas's opinions, which while perhaps well-reasoned, are not always necessarily where the full court is at. But
Thomas often stands alone. Thomas often stands alone. Yeah,
he's comfortable doing that for sure. Mm-hmm. And so he's not necessarily always the most influential member of the court, even though liberals will try and paint him that way a lot of times, actually.
He's often the least influential, by some measures, which is interesting.
But regardless, but doesn't that imply then that the Supreme Court nominations are actually even more important, perhaps, if you're a gun rights advocate? Well, yeah.
I would say this. I would say, okay, let's think about the real world. In the real world, if a Trump wins, very unlikely you'll see any retirement by any of the younger justices. So Gorsuch, Barrett, Kavanaugh, no. Unlikely that you would see Roberts retire under a Trump term, because all the available indication is Roberts doesn't have much regard for Trump at all. Now, the 2 oldest are Alito and Thomas. They also happen to be, in all likelihood, 2 of the most protective of gun rights. And so if they retire during a Trump administration, in all likelihood, you would have status quo. It wouldn't really change the status quo. So you would replace somebody. Trump would probably, in all likelihood, replace Alito or Thomas with somebody who's pretty good on gun rights, although there's enough confusion about what MAGA legal culture is versus, say, Federalist Society now. They're very different.
There's been some friction there.
There's some friction. So we don't know exactly who he'd nominate, but the smart money would say somebody who is at least probably as protective of gun rights as Thomas and Alito.
He at least
but it would
has
be
the
status
record
quo.
he can point to. Yeah.
Yeah.
He did do that last time. There was a lot of skepticism going in, including for myself, that he would uphold those promises, and he did.
Right.
Although I guess the thing with Trump is that you kind of don't exactly know exactly what he might do. That's my thing with him, at least.
You just don't. You don't know for sure. And if Harris wins, it's probably status quo because much
they won't
more
retire,
doubtful. They won't retire, right? Unless they have like a health event or something like that. So again, what you're looking at is a situation where, although there are differences between the candidates, when you think it through in the real world, it really gets to a point where it's hard to imagine the federal government doing much dramatic one way or the other, either through the judiciary or the legislature during the next 4 years. Where the real battle is at the state level. That's where the real battle is. Especially since, by the way, Stephen, no circuit court as of yet has struck down an assault weapons ban. So all of the circuit courts that have heard assault weapons bans have upheld them. So, we're really in a position.
They all happen to be in the more liberal districts, right? And
they're in the more liberal circuits.
That's one of the challenges for gun rights advocates, as we've talked about on the show before as well.
And so far, the Supreme Court has not been all that willing to take these assault weapons cases. Nope. And in fact, they sent them back for reconsideration in light of Rahimi. So I don't know where they're going to come out. I really don't know.
Well, we should do a whole episode on just that. But I know you got another engagement to get to. So I really appreciate you coming on and giving us your perspective. Really like to have a variety of views on these things. That's the goal of this show. So I do appreciate you coming on and giving your point of view and explaining and answering questions. So thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell people where they can find more of your writing and hear more from you if they want to?
Yeah, just New York Times. I'm a columnist. I write a newsletter and a column every week. I also, post blogs. I'm on Threads, the social media outlet. David French Jag is my handle there. I may come back to Twitter for the campaign season. I don't know, still up in the air, but the best place to read me is just not social media. Social media is awful. Read the columns and newsletters if you care to. So that's where you can find me. All
right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to tell people a little bit more about the Dispatch now. Okay, it is time once again to talk about the Dispatch. We're doing a promo swap. We've been doing it for a little while now, and it's a pretty easy thing for me to get behind because I've been a paying subscriber at the Dispatch really since it launched, and I think it's one of the best publications out there, especially in your center right media, your conservative media, in large part because they focus, like we do here at The Reload, on hard news reporting first. That's what they were founded to do. That's where they put a lot of their energies. I read the Morning Dispatch every single day to keep up to date with what's going on in the country, in politics, and in news from a national perspective. And I would highly recommend it to anybody who's listening. There's a free trial if you follow the link in our bio here or down below in the description over at The Reload's website or in the newsletter. You'll find the link to that free trial, so you can, not just take my word for it, but go and try out a subscription over there. You'll get access to all kinds of great original hard news reporting. That's their sort of bread and butter, I would say, especially stuff that, it's great to read the Morning Dispatch because it gives you a little bit of a different approach, a little bit of a different take on these stories that they're finding and that they're reporting, and they're gathering information and bringing it to you. And it just has a different editorial take as well. It's more for the politically homeless, for people like, I think there was 53% in the most recent Pew poll that wanted a different option than what they have in the current presidential election. So if you feel that way, I think you probably find yourself right at home over at the Dispatch. Of course they have big name analysts and opinion writers there as well who come from a center right perspective. People you've heard of before, I'm sure. Jonah Goldberg, Steve Hayes, Kevin Williamson, Ala Pundin, if you've been deeply immersed in online media for the last 15 years like I have, one of the best writers out there. And it continues on down the line. They've got a really great lineup of writers over there. Chris Steyerwalt's another really good one. It's just a fantastic publication. And this is actually getting long. I don't think I was supposed to go on for this long, but it's easy to do that when I'm talking about the Dispatch, because I have a lot of respect for what they've done. Another independent publication, startup. They've really had a great success, and I think they're the model for our industry, and also a place where you're going to find value if you go over and check them out. So, click the link, get your free trial, try them out for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. But yeah, the Dispatch, head over and check them out.